Welcome back. Thank you for hanging out with us once again. This is the one and only IT in the D Show. I'm your host, Bob Waltenspiel, hanging out with producer extraordinaire and my co-host, Randy Walker. Guest this week, the illustrious one, our guest from episode number 1. No, I'm not kidding. Episode number 1, almost 10 years ago. Wolfgang Goerlich's in the house, advisory CISO, all around good dude. This is going to be a great reminiscing story and talking about modern day security. You do not want to miss it. Find us online, itinthed.com, and do us a favor, give us a like on the socials, subscribe to us everywhere fine podcasts are sold. Don't forget Feb 16. It's 2 days after Valentine's Day. If you celebrate that sort of thing, we're going to be back at Urban Rest. We're going to be there for a while. We got a private back room, great beer, food truck. We don't know what the food is yet, but a great time. No speakers, no sponsors, just good old-fashioned IT networking. Hope to see you there. Meetup.com/IT in the D for more info. So, Randy, I got to share one thing with you. Something I swore I'd never do, and I did it. I subscribed to Paramount Plus. I succumbed.
Nice.
I succumbed.
Now you got to catch up on all the Star Trek.
I succumbed. I know Star Trek's next on the list. Well, I have 2 friends that were in the Tulsa King with Stallone, and we it's actually a good show. And me and my wife binged it all weekend, and now I made up my money for. But I'm mad at myself because that's the one I swore I wasn't going to do.
I like it. There's lots of stuff on there. South Park's on there.
Yeah, I saw. I hate myself. I'm going to watch it out of spite. Wolfgang, how you been, buddy? This has been. You were on 453 episodes ago. I couldn't even tell you what we talked. I couldn't even tell you what we talked about in episode 1. But let me be the first to say, holy shit, it's good to have you back.
Wow. Who knew back then that we would be here? Who could have foreseen that this would happen?
We also had you on episode 112, so it
doesn't count
all the way.
That doesn't count.
That doesn't count.
I was here. 2013. I was talking about B-Sides Detroit at the time.
You were?
So we were doing the B-Sides Detroit conference. I was doing my first podcast. I was interviewing these speakers, and way over editing and way overthinking. I went back and listened to a couple of those episodes recently and winced. It's sort of like when you have the pictures of you in high school and you're like, did I really have that haircut? Did I really think that was a good decision?
Why did you want to look like Morrissey in high school, Bob? Yeah, that's
right. But wow, we've come a long way.
We didn't have any gray in our beard back then. And another thing was we didn't even know what a podcast was. We just thought it was our internet radios, and we were going to go talk in a can. And we sat in that little studio up in the Russell Industrial Center. And
and I thought I was going to die. So can I tell this story? So this is the Russell.
Please.
And the Russell, of course, has gotten better. But I get this message from some stranger on the internet. And they're like, hey, why don't you come and podcast with us? I'm like, okay, sure. And they're like, yeah, here's this address. So I drive to this address. And the Russell Detroit was just starting to come back. And like, I'm in the middle of like nothing, just broken windows and glass and concrete and graffiti. And I'm like, I'm going to die here. This is how I die. And finally, I think it was, I don't know if it was you or one of your producers or someone opened a side door out of nowhere. Like, hey, are you Wolf? I'm like, yes. Like, follow me. And then we're climbing up in these stairs and all this sort of like in and out. And I'm like, what is going on? And it was really just the atmosphere was really ominous. I felt like I was like in some sort of cyberpunk movie. Until we got to your studio. Studio was great, but the entrance was very cyberpunk.
We could probably do an entire episode just telling stories on navigating the manual freight elevator, trying to carry, coolers up. This is before we pre-drank at the bar. And then across the street from us was across the hallway, was 4 grow rooms that got raided by the FBI.
There was someone, so it wasn't legal then.
Yeah, there was not legal then. There was someone that got stabbed in the neck with a pen at the jail and broke out, and they basically closed the place down because his brother had a suite in there. And then all that, and then they did Batman versus Superman there, so we couldn't record that night because they were filming the scene with like the car chase. That place was, that's exactly what it needed to be at the time. We couldn't do some cushy Royal Oak studio; it had to be there.
Yes, that was perfect. That was perfect, and that was that was my that was one of the first podcasts I guested on, I think, and we clearly have both survived, which is great.
So
I'm sad I wasn't part of the show back then.
it was it was good
missed
series.
the-
I never really
emotional
one of these
experience.
days, Randy, I'll sit down and we'll just start telling like because it was that good. It really was. Well, and the fact that we had somebody right before us and we had to like kick them out of the studio 9 times out of 10 and it smelled like weed in the studio. And then we're bringing in like CIOs and corporate people because we were all in person then. Yeah, it was we got the side eye a few times. So the first thing I've been thinking about this all day because I'm dying to ask this question. So in 10 years, because we always talk about how technology changes every 3 months, it's the old joke,
Oh
but
my goodness.
it doesn't, but it does, but it doesn't. So what's, looking back at what security was to you 10 years ago compared to today, like what is it's gotten more complicated? Has it got more simple? Is it, is it crazy 180? Is it the same? Like I'm dying to know what your take is on that.
You got to remember. I mean, so all right, people are still the people, right? We're running like modern hardware on 30,000-year-old firmware. So people are still making all the same mistakes. That hasn't changed. But if you think about it, like everything happened all at once. So the cloud, I mean, clearly the cloud existed for a long time, but Azure, AWS came in just a few years before that episode. BYOD, something we don't think about. BYOD was coined as a term 1 year before, 2012. BYOD became a term in terms of Intel 29.
I haven't heard that.
Apple.
I haven't heard that acronym in a long time, actually.
Yeah, because now we just think it's just what we do.
Yeah.
So we lost control of the devices. We lost control of our apps. Data centers were still a thing back then. I was still running out of a data center and building data centers. Now, who would do that? It's all in AWS or GCP or Azure. And then, of course, at least we still had the fact that people came into our office. So we still had like, can we see what they're doing over the firewall? And can we see where they're browsing? And let's put on an antivirus that talks back and we'll use, System Center to push out patches. Well, of course, I mean, as we're all recording this, as we all know, no one's in an office anymore if you can help it. And so all computers are remote, all networks are remote, all apps are gone, all devices are not ours. and we're trying to secure it. And oftentimes using these really antiquated techniques. Back then, you could do pretty good if you had a AV and you had a SIM and you had a strong firewall, right? And now, forget it. Lots changed.
I was to say, if you had an RSA keychain, you were a god. Like that was just limited for the big boys.
It's funny you say that because one of the things, and I wrote about this, I got really bored in 2020, and I did a whole deep dive into 20th century design, and I wrote about Ray-Bans, and I talked about how Ray-Bans were originally safety goggles, but no one ever thinks about it. They think about the cool sunglasses that make you want to hum the Top Gun theme, which I'm not going to do for your listeners. but in a very same way, that's how we sold 2FA back then. If you had a key ring of RSA tokens in a money management firm, you were someone important, right?
Oh yeah. You were in the movie War Games. Like you were, yeah. I think for me at least, obviously I've been on the sales side, the business side this whole time, but the one question, I was talking to a CISO, I forget who it was, but it was the culmination that Microsoft is a player in the security game. And I was mind blown because that was always the biggest joke is, that integrated firewall. But then he's like, no, Microsoft's legit. And then you pull back the covers a little bit and you take a look and you're like, holy, when did that happen? Like, cause it's been, it was like overnight. It just became a player in the security stack.
Yeah. 15 billion is what they reported in revenue last year. Microsoft in security, just in their security business unit. So 15 billion. Now you think about that in terms of all these other security startups that are happy to get 15 million, right? Weird world.
Well, it was it's almost like that. It was, I want to say it was homegrown because if you look at I worked at Cisco and then all of a sudden they just started acquiring security companies and they started giving away stuff for free when you bought out $1 million worth of routers. And then all of a sudden they have a security division. Now people are paying for it because they evolved with the products and the stuff was actually good. And
Yeah.
But Microsoft, that was actually homegrown. It's like, I'd love to get, that would be a podcast if you could find out who the hell was that person that transformed that whole entire BU to make something, again, 15 billion. I'm shocked.
Absolutely
Literally, I'm
incredible.
shocked.
Also, if we were to go back to 2013 and say, can you imagine in 2023 that there are more people running Microsoft Linux than Microsoft Windows? We would have laughed you out of the room, right? I mean, who would have even thought of that?
See,
But
now
most people spin up all Linux servers.
Oh yeah, if they're putting VMs, they're all yeah,
and they run .NET on Linux. Who would have thought? So weird.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, it's true. Craziness. So one of the we were laughing pre-show because we called it shared hosting back in 98, and it became the cloud. And I was not a late adopter in cloud, but I was because I was an early adopter in the technology. I was a late adopter in the name. I hated calling it that. Like stupid marketing people. And so now it's like the new one is, we had Randy, what was it, 8 shows in a row where we had somebody that was a consultant that did digital transformation. So we laughed. It was like, what is digital transformation? And we got a completely 100% different answer every show. And I wanted to splice them all together, but we're too lazy. So I need to ask you, it's the same thing. What is zero trust to you? I need to find this out.
I would tell you that, but before I do, around the time you were doing hosting, I was doing a digital transformation project. I kid you not, for a hospital. And what that meant was we're taking away the typewriters from very cranky nurses. And we called it digital transformation. So whenever it starts saying digital transformation again, I'm like, is there typewriters involved? Did people not do this 20 years ago? Where have you been? But then we have zero trust. Oh, zero trust. So it's funny you mentioned cloud, because one of the reasons I joined my current role was to really champion zero trust. And one of the reasons I did that was because it reminded me so much of cloud, right? Because everyone's like, oh, I've got 1,000,001 definitions of cloud, and cloud is just someone else's computer, and cloud doesn't matter. We've been doing cloud since 1998. Not to put you in the spot, but that's what everyone said back in 2013. And now 2023, we look back and go, wow, I mean, we can really actually do some pretty cool stuff that we could do before. I mean, the automation, the scale, all that sort of stuff. We could never have done that a decade ago.
No.
And so I started hearing in 2018 and 2019 people talking about zero trust the same way. Like, oh, well, I've been doing NAC forever. I've been doing VPN forever. I've been doing MTLS forever. Oh my goodness. You just figured out you needed to do multi-factor. We used to have RSA tokens, right? All the things we've already talked about. And it occurred to me, one of two things is going to happen. And I'm hoping you'll have me back on in 2033 to figure out if we're right about this. One of two things is going to happen. Either one, no one's going to care about zero trust and it's all going to fizzle out. Or two, zero trust principles are going to become ubiquitous in security, just like cloud compute has become ubiquitous in how we host and deliver apps. It's only one of two ways.
See, I think it's already become ubiquitous from an identity standpoint, from an AD perspective. I think it's already been ubiquitous. What I'm hearing more of it now is cloaking of the endpoints and cloaking of the devices and making sure those are off the grid, as so to speak. I think we've all been doing the user stuff, I think, since day one, or at least we're trying to. I'd like to see somebody complain about having to do 2-factor, because it's getting to the point now where if I have to do it 4 times a day and type in a little code from Microsoft, I'm like, God bless America, again. Because sometimes it seems like it doesn't have a brain. I can go 2 days and not refactor, and then I can go 4 times in 4 hours. But again, they need to understand that it's part of keeping them safe, or at least keeping them away, the bad people away.
Well, and I mean, yes, it absolutely is. And yes, I mean, some of these principles, like strong authentication of user, we've been talking about forever. I mean, all these components, it all goes back to TCP/IP and stuff we were doing 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Anyways. But I think what's really fascinating is the injection of a policy in every single session, every single request. Now, why I think that's interesting is what you just said. I can go for a couple of days without having to multi-factor. Previously, with those dang RSA tokens or whatever hardware keys, every single time you went to access everything, it was a pain. And so a lot of security people are really heavily emphasizing the zero. Like, let's make it hard. Let's make it more difficult. Let's put in codes again. Why are we doing push? Let's make sure you're only on your computer at your office. All this sort of stuff that a security person would do. I find the trust side more interesting. How can we relax security the 99.9% of the time when people are just trying to do their job? How do we get out of the way?
Well, I think one of the things is like, they open up an admin account for Timmy, the consultant, that's there on a 2-month contract, and they never close it down, and it sits open and stagnant, and then the passwords never change. And again, I think the whole thing, nothing's changed in 30 years because users are still dumb. And I don't mean that in a mean way. Because somebody that's an accountant, that they've been studying accounting, data security to them is foreign and it's icky, and they don't care because they just want to do their what they do well, or designers or anybody for that matter. And I feel like they keep trying to do these security awareness things, courses, phishing tests, and I think I don't think it's never been perfect. It'll never be perfect as long as you have people.
No, and that's what I was saying. We're running brand new hardware on 30,000-year-old firmware, and people are people, and people are going to do what people do. And your point about taxes is really funny because I'm going through a process where I'm trying to find a new account, and I've interviewed accountants, and I'm working in quotes and everything. And there are two types of accountants I found, and the type 1 accountant goes something like this: "You are in computer security. That's cool. I don't think you want to know anything about accounting. We will try and save you money." And I go, "I love you." Type 2 accountant goes, "You're in security. Let me try and educate you about accounting and about your tax responsibilities." I hate that second person.
Yeah.
I don't want to know accounting. Don't give me a tax awareness training. I don't care. Just take my money and make it go away.
Well, that's no different than an accounting firm hiring you. They hiring you because
100%.
you know what you do, and they know what they do, and let me do me. And that was the whole reason. That was the biggest argument in blue collar Detroit was, why in the hell do you have 19 racks of servers in your god blessed basement that that's not with water, overhead, sprinklers, and what do you do? Like, you make seats or widgets or whatever. Like, why?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the funny thing is, especially on my side of the fence, more on, infrastructure and whatnot, we see that AS400 still sitting in that closet with the 10 meg, pre-switch pub that's working. And it's like, it's working. And I think that a big, the mentality are starting to switch, but it's been, for the last 10 years, it's almost like what I've seen is like, if it's not, we're good. We got these old mainframes, these old big irons, and, we don't want to change.
It's not broken, don't fix it. That's what they say.
Until it breaks, and then you're going to pay double, right? Isn't that the joke?
I killed a mainframe at my last role. And this was my favorite story for the longest time because I was like, I put a stake in the heart of legacy technology. And, we moved it all on this web app system, and had this cool SQL backend, and we built it with DevOps, and it was cloudy, and everything was cool. And it was good because the mainframe was incredibly insecure. If you walked by it and sneezed, you get root. And if you didn't sneeze, it was okay because half the people were SUing to root to print anyways. And everything was overtelling it. It was terrible. And I felt really good about this for a long time. I felt like I have made my mark for humanity on the cave wall by taking down a mainframe. And I was telling this story to a bunch of college kids because, I still did the circuit in college. By the way, if you're listening to this and you're in a university and you want me to talk to your kids, happy to do so. It may take me a while, but I'm happy to do so. So I was talking to some college kids and telling the story. And they're like, "Oh, Mr. Goerlich, what did you move it on to?" I'm like, "Oh, I think it was SQL Server 2012. And some of the people started laughing. And I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "Oh, did you know that went end of life last year?" Like, no, don't tell me my favorite story about killing legacy is now legacy. If we had kept that, we're still running that in a data center somewhere, there'd be some young pup, probably with a lot less gray hair than you or me, going, they left me this SQL 2012 and I killed this legacy system, right? Because we just keep doing the same thing over and over again.
When I was your age. Yeah, exactly. Well, that was one of my favorite stories from my daughter. She comes downstairs and says, Dad, the internet sucks in this house. And I'm like, and I started getting ratty and I go, you dirty dog. I go, we got the equivalent of 2 OC3s bonded coming into this house. And when I was your age, I had a T1 and I was lucky. And she looked like I'm speaking German to her. Like, what in the blue hell are you saying, Dad? And then, now I got 25-year-olds working with me that I'm like, they don't even comprehend. They can't even comprehend the time before time before time. It's like Mad Max, like when I came up in the data center. It's like, so you just look
what do
at
you
me
mean
like
you ran wires? Why didn't you just do like an SD-WAN with that? Oh, kids.
So you are you're doing something that I've been talking about doing for 10 years and I never had the balls to do it. So hats off to you for doing this, but you're putting on a conference in October.
Yes. Which is also kind of ironic because the first time I was on, I was talking about a conference. And now here I am talking about a conference again.
So now it's B and now it's a Z side. You've gotten so far down the alphabet. Yeah.
Yeah. So Security B-Sides is an institution. And it will always be an institution. People have been running those in many cities and many places. And it's always a great way to get up and coming talent, get people together. But I did that for many years. And then I also launched the Converge conference with that same crew and was happy to participate in that. And then I stepped aside from that. I let them go in their own direction. I swore to myself, I will never, ever, ever, never, ever, ever, never, ever run a conference again. Promised myself that. And fast forward a couple years, and my wife is out with me and had some cocktails, and she was pouting about something, and I'm saying pouting because she would say pouting. And she looks at me, she goes, if they won't host my talk, I want to give my talk myself. I'm like, I'm going to give you a conference. We're going to do this together. And then we sobered up the next morning and went, are you serious? I'm like, I guess I'm serious. I swear I would never do that ever again. But yeah, so the thing is, she is a sex and relationship therapist. I'm a hacker. And for a long time, we've realized that there's some really intriguing overlap in the work that she does, right? So if you're trying to establish a relationship, if you are dating someone, if you're flirting with someone, if you're married to someone and you're, keeping the spark alive, right? There's a number of different apps and tools and websites and mobile phone stuff and internet of a variety of different things that is coming into play. And as you might imagine, most of these things are not very secure. So what we're doing is this October, in conjunction with the podcast that she and I have been putting on, this October 19 and 20, we're bringing together a bunch of sex coaches, sex therapists, sex tech producers, a bunch of hackers, a bunch of cybersecurity people. We're bringing them all together down to the Athenaeum, and we're going to be talking about security in a way that lay people talk about. Just like you and I were talking about earlier with I don't want to know about the taxes, because what lay people want to know is, are my pictures safe? Is my financials safe? Are my kids safe? Are my wife safe? They don't really give a crap about SQL injection.
Right. So did you got a kitschy name for it, or what? I guess what is are you guys ready for
Yeah, Securing Sexuality. Which you can find on Apple Podcasts, and it's securingsexuality.com has the podcast and the conference information.
It feels a little Randy, feels a little PenguinCon, but like now that PenguinCon's kind of slowing down, this might be taking over for it. Different time of year.
It feels like a whole track that would be presented
Absolutely.
at PenguinCon, and then some.
Well, yeah, Wolf, I was telling you before pre-show, like we wrote a whole, I think it was a 6-parter. If I can dig them up, I'll find it. I'll send them to you, but it's called the dating corollary, where we would relate business to your personal life and your business life is very intertwined, even though you might not think so. Just the way you nurture business relationships and sales and And that was kind of the whole, it wasn't, it wasn't really funny, more or less. It was like, don't treat business contacts like, like one night stands, because it never ends well. You're going to get one out of 50 might say yes, but then the rest of the time you're discouraged.
Well, here's the thing about that. Jumping back to zero trust, and on the topic of relationships, day job, we did a report with Scientia, and Scientia polls 5,000 people, 26 countries. It says, what are you doing and what security outcomes are you getting? This is a security outcomes report. And the first year came out, it said, people who have business continuity have better relationships, with their execs, their peers, the business. I thought, aha, coming from a BCDR perspective, of course, because I'm in finance, I can talk about finance. I'm in trucks, I can talk about trucks. This only makes sense. And then they did a similar slice of the data, and they looked at incident response and found strong relationships, execs, peers, business. And I went, that's kind of weird. Like, how does that tie in? And then they looked at endpoint detection response. They looked at zero trust, and consistently, the consistent theme is organizations with strong relationships report being twice as likely to have a mature security capability, regardless of the security capability. And I think that gets to exactly what you're talking about. If you just treat your business partners, your vendors, your internal customers, your external customers as a one night stand, you're going nowhere.
Well, that's what I always get mocked at work, because everybody like, hey, anybody got any good meetings this week? And it's just sharing, and it's just, so we're all remote, and everything is like, yep, this person for drinks, that person for drinks, that person for drinks, that person for drinks, that person for drinks. And they're like, is there any meeting you don't do? And I go, well, here's the thing. Like, we can have 2 drinks and bail. I've had a lot of those, but like, at least we're like, we get into the personal side. There's more to life than just like, selling cloud transformation service. You know what I mean? There's a personal side, and there's 20 guys that sell the same shit I do, but you know what I mean? Is you got to have that connect, and thank God I actually like people.
Thank God.
Thank God. So like, I'm genuinely curious. Like, that's one of the reasons why, continuing this podcast and doing this is like, I'm genuinely curious about like people in different, how you look at things, how everyone looks at things differently. I'm completely intrigued. So like, that was one of the things I was dying to ask you too, is, this is another one of those, what is digital transformation? And you're going to get 47 different answers. I, typically, the only one that's ever had short shelf lives was people like me in IT. Like, I did, 4 years at Cisco and 5 years at HP. And then all of a sudden you go to startups and you do a year here and a year and a half there. And you're like, God, I just want to stay somewhere. But I see that in CISOs now almost, where a couple of them stick around, but then all of a sudden you see 1 year and a half bounce, year and a half bounce. Then it's either I know it's not the people, because the people are good. It's, the organizations are, what, I guess, how the sauce, you don't have to tell me how all the sausage is made, but what is it that they're putting too much personal risk on them? Is it too much that the environment is just such shit? Like, what is the common element, like why that happens to like really good CISOs, that they just, are constantly being like shuffled?
If you're in an environment and you're unable to build those relationships, if you're in an environment, you're unable to get the budget, if you're in an environment and you're unable to make things move forward, why would you stay when there's someone right next door going to offer you more money?
Sure.
And I think that's the main thing. There's a CISO I really, really admire. His name's Martin Fisher. He's with Northside Hospital out of Atlanta. And back to B-Sides, he actually did the B-Sides Atlanta for a long time. He had posted a thing on Mastodon just today, which I loved. He said, a CISO is a C-level project manager of resources they don't own, on projects the CISO never took on, and projects that the CISO is on the hook to deliver. And that's where you're stuck, right? And if it works and you got good chemistry and everything feels right, you're going to stay there 3, 4, 5, 10 years. If it's not, you're going to bail, and because there's a lot of opportunity out there.
And that's one of the things that always got me, was the budget part. And we have those arguments in my work, where we're doing consulting that produces business outcomes, right? And they're like, well, they don't have the budget. I go, well, isn't the work that we're doing going to create budget? Because typically you're not going to spend $1 if you're not making $1.50 back. It doesn't make sense. Like, just building cool shit doesn't cut it anymore. A lot of, I think there's too many people in IT that just think that, their outputs equal outcomes, and it's not necessarily the case. So like, I think that's the problem I always saw it with security was the pocketbooks don't open until they get really wrecked. And then then some CFO cuts a check that goes to the wrong bank because they got spoofed. And then they get to spend $1.5 million on fixing it. So it never happens again. Up until then, it's like, I'm not putting locks on my front door. I'm not buying a dog. My house never got robbed. Like that was always the mentality. I guess, I get, it depends on the organization, but what are you seeing out there? Is there any way to quantify like what security is to an org other than like, because again, you could build a moat and put alligators and buy 100 guns and, it's still,
this is going to sound like the wrong answer, but I don't think the problem is quantifying. We can quantify, right? There's lots of numbers out there to say the cost per record. There's lots of numbers out there to say that the mean dollar impact to ransomware. There's plenty of sites that say, oh, if you're this size company and you get breached, here's your likelihood of surviving the next 3 years. There's all that's out there. The problem back to 30,000 years of wetware we're all running on is people don't believe the risk until it happens. I think the human condition is one of ignoring risk. And cybersecurity professionals, we got beat up for talking tech. And so we went, the business is talking risk. We'll talk risk. And then we went and tried to talk risk and really overcomplicated with FAIR and octave and formulas and graphs. I do executive coaching, and I have a CISO come to me going, hey, what's the right color to use? I'm like, do you have the relationship? Do you know what they care about? Are you talking about business relevant terms? Because the best number and the best statistic and the best color won't save you.
Sure. That's again, that's what boils it all down. It's the whole if I don't see it, it isn't dirty type of thing. It's such a guy mentality. It's kind of like it's kind of like you don't think about buying life insurance until your 50th birthday and your knees are hurting and you're like, oh crap, I'm gonna die soon. I better not leave my wife high and dry. Instead of like thinking when you're 25, I need to set myself up. Nobody,
of course,
unless you get forced 401k, like everybody's like, I don't care, Yeah. So that's the interesting part. So where can we find you online? Obviously on LinkedIn, we'll put you on the show notes, but like the conference again was?
Yeah. So the conference is securing-sexuality.com. And my website is jwgoerlich.com.
Beautiful. We'll put it all in the show notes. Obviously, it was great catching up. We need to, speaking of having drinks, we need to schedule that. So I'll shoot you a note. We'll try to get some time on the calendar.
Please.
And it's really awesome seeing you again. And, wish you obviously nothing but continued success.
Same here. Great talking with you.
Hey, we're going to wrap things up for episode 454. On behalf of Bob and Randy, do us all a favor. Drink up your drinks. Get your phone numbers. You don't got to go home. You just got to get the hell out of here. See you next week. Drive careful. Beat it.